All right, so thank you very much. I hope you all enjoyed your lunch and an opportunity to walk around the exhibition, but fear not, there'll be more time after the final session for a cocktail reception and an opportunity to tour the exhibition where we have stationary fuel cells from all the OEMs, excuse me, as well as some user videos that we've recorded in the past couple months, as I mentioned earlier in the morning, showing different technologies, different applications, and different countries. So this afternoon session will be the technical session, where we will be focusing on the lessons learned from the PACE project and also looking at future scenarios of fuel cell micro-CHP. So this is really the meat of the project. So we have work package leaders with us on the stage to present the high-level overview of the results. The results themselves, if they're going to be publicly available, will be made available on the PACE website. So fear not. So a lot of hard work, blood and tears went into pulling together all of these results from, I said, an 83-month project. So there's a lot of content there and a lot to review and a lot of interesting and positive outputs in terms of the application of fuel cell micro-CHP. I'm going to give a very high-level introduction to the project. You've heard a lot about it already, so I won't spend too much in the detail. As a fuel cell micro-CHP user myself, I'll try to share some experiences myself as well, having owned and run one for almost 4 years now, in fact. So what you have here is PACE at a glance. You've seen it in promotional materials, the brochure, but this is just a very high-level overview of the PACE project. PACE project composed of 9 partners. You can imagine, an 83-month project. Partners come and go, partners evolve, partners change. But as of today, we are 9 partners. The objective of the project was to sell and install and commission 2,500 units, and you've heard already that we're well beyond that figure, to be deployed across Europe between 2016, the start of the project. And I'm sure some of the OEMs perhaps are still working on installing them all the way up until Sunday, because that's when the project ends. The original goal was to see around 500 units systems per manufacturer, but that has evolved as the project has evolved, as the partners have evolved. We also had 4 countries that we focused on specifically in terms of policy and market development. They are Belgium, Italy, the Netherlands, and the UK. The UK at the time was actually part of the EU. So we've done, and there are specific deliverables linked to that, and you'll hear some of that discussion actually later in the afternoon in the policy panel, so there's no point going into that into too much detail. The total budget will be around 90 million after the 83 months. As I mentioned before, 34 million of that came from the public coffers, so to speak, from the European Commission, and the other 56 million was matched by contributions in kind from the OEMs in the project. COGEN Europe is the coordination and dissemination partner. This is part of the dissemination activities today in front of you, as well as to those of you online, and also whomever wants to peruse the videos after they're made available at the end of the project. We have 5 manufacturers that are represented today. You heard in the panel discussion, also exhibiting at the exhibit. Wiesmann, the BDR Thermea group, where Centertech is the lead in terms of the fuel cell deployment. We have Solid Era, we have Bosch, and we have Sunfire. And then we have 3 key research partners, and I'm happy that they're all here with us today, from Element Energy, DTU, and HLSU. Moving on very quickly, we heard a lot about this in the previous panel, but I mean, one of the primary focuses of this project was really to push fuel cell micro-CHP closer to market take-up. A lot was done, a lot of momentum was built. We're probably not as far as we would like to be in terms of mass market penetration, in terms of volumes, in terms of decreasing costs, but I think we've we've moved the marker one step further. And this is not just the work of PACE, this was a culmination of different projects at an EU level, but even at a national level. You have Kalux in Germany, Ennefield, the predecessor to PACE, and then also you heard about KfW, which unfortunately ended in terms of its support for fuel cell micro-CHP in Germany at the end of December last year. So as I said, the main purpose is to reduce costs, improve competitiveness, improve the product's performances. So we do have several generations of fuel cell micro-CHP units out in the market from all the OEMs. Establish fuel cell micro-CHP as a standard technology. Obviously, there have been a lot of challenges, but in terms of pushing it into the mainstream and also really getting the technology recognized by EU policymakers, and even just reminding them that, you know, the EU just spent 34 million euros in helping the uptake of fuel cell micro-CHP, you'd think would be easy, but it's still a challenge. Raising awareness of fuel cell micro-CHP, I think we've gone a long way since the beginning of Ennefield, and then using that momentum into PACE, and then of course after PACE, the promotion of fuel cell micro-CHP obviously doesn't stop, it will continue. And then of course finally to demonstrate product readiness is a key component to deliver the EU energy goals. And we, over 83 months, as I mentioned in my introductory remarks, we've gone through 2 policy cycles. We had the Clean Energy Package, the Fit for 55 package, Repower EU, and again, a plethora of different national initiatives from an energy and climate perspective. So for PACE, and here I'd like to make parallels to myself in terms of a user who decided to make that leap 3-4 years ago. I took out an eco loan, and what were my motivations? I mean, I wanted to actually be a prosumer, an empowered energy consumer, and this is part of the project. I was very much interested in the financial rewards in terms of economy. Obviously that was important, but there were also environmental benefits in terms of clean air. No combustion equals no SOx, no NOx. And even if we're taking gas from natural gas from the grid, we're reducing CO2 emissions anywhere between 30 and 35%. So, you know, being a prosumer consumer is an important part of that project. Supporting the energy transition, like I said, different policy initiatives, and this very much feeds, at least the objectives of the project, feed into those policy initiatives. Flexibility, I think, is key, and probably even more key now. And I'll get into that in a little more detail in my other slides. And then, of course, this is a research innovation project, so fostering innovation and high-value jobs. We heard from some of the OEMs that, you know, enticing installers to install a fuel cell micro-CHP is a challenge. There is the hydraulics, there's the electrical component, and you don't necessarily always find one person who can do all of those things. So, you know, also educating and empowering installers. So I already mentioned a little bit in terms of, you know, supporting energy transition. We have the system total efficiencies up to 90%, including the electrical efficiencies up to 60%, depending on the technology, reducing CO2 emissions, and also, as I mentioned, clean air, which you don't see here because it's a chemical process, not a combustion process. You virtually eliminate NOx and SOx, which is an important local issue, especially when we're looking at residential application. Flexibility, we heard a lot about that as well in the different panels and also from the Commission representatives. Flexibility is key. Heating is, let's say, in a unique situation. It's seasonal for the most part, although, you know, with warmer summers we may have maybe the same demand curves as we see in the winter, but it is a seasonal application, and you see peak demands, and flexibility will be key in the future. We don't want to invest billions and billions in reinforcing grids at a DSO level or a TSO level, but and we see fuel cell micro-CHP and micro-CHP in general, to be perfectly honest, as being an enabler in terms of providing that flexibility as we move forward to a higher penetration of electrification, may that be heat pumps, electric cars, etc. As I mentioned, fosters innovation, highly valued jobs. I've had an opportunity to visit most of the OEM's installations. It's very impressive. You have highly qualified, skilled people working in these facilities, in these factories, producing the fuel cells, the stacks, everything that you see around it. You can have a closer look in the exhibition. And honestly, that's it from my side, so thank you. We're going to move to the next part, which is work package 1, which we call the trial overview, and also a mix of some of the deliverables from work package 2, looking at the customer survey. So I'm very pleased to invite Isobel Kaul, who's a consultant project manager at Element Energy, and she's going to talk through some of the important results coming out of the project. So the floor is yours, Isobel.
Thank you. Oh. Can I go back a slide?
The little one goes back.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. My name is Isobel Kaul, and as Hans said, I work for Element Energy, which is an ERM group company. Element Energy is a strategic energy consultancy that specializes in the intelligent analysis of low-carbon energy technologies. And in the PACE project specifically, we work as the technical lead, so we work closely with the coordinators, COGEN Europe, and all of the manufacturers to ensure the successful delivery of the trial itself. We also work with DTU and HLSU on the performance validation of the units and the business case analysis, which you'll hear a bit more from my colleagues. So today I'll be giving a bit of an overview of the trial itself, of the outcomes of it and the successes, and also sharing some of our learnings from the customer insights work that we've done. So you had an introduction to the project itself from Hans just now, but as he said, the primary objective of the trial was to demonstrate the deployment of over 2,500 fuel cell micro-CHP units across Europe. And in doing so, to also demonstrate the improving efficiency and reliability of the units and be able to collect data on their performance in a real-life scenario. So there have been a number of unanticipated obstacles over the course of the project that could not be foreseen back in 2017. This includes, but is by no means limited to, the COVID-19 pandemic, which really impacted kind of all stages of the delivery, from manufacturing to the installation and the maintenance of units as well. And this, as you can imagine, had a huge impact for sort of a little under 2 years of the project. But having said this, the PACE partners and the manufacturers have been able to work together and work really hard to overcome these obstacles and successfully build routes to market for the technology. And to date, there have been a little under 2,600 units installed across 9 different EU countries. In addition to the field demonstration itself, product innovation and improvements has also been a really key part of the project, and multiple generations of the equipment have been deployed and tested. So you can see on this slide some of the different technology that has been on offer in the PACE project. There have been 6 manufacturers that have participated at various points throughout the entire project, and we've seen more significant delivery of units in the hundreds of units from the 4 more advanced manufacturers. So you can see the technology on display on this slide, and also in the exhibition hall that you may have already had a chance to look at. The PACE trial has included both SOFC and PEM technology, ranging from 0.7 kilowatts up to 1.5. Making it applicable for a range of different building sizes, from sort of single-family homes all the way up to SMEs, apartment buildings, and multi-family homes as well. As I said before, innovation and improvements to manufacturing has been an important part of the project, and multiple generations of the equipment have been tested. So most OEMs have had generation X, Y, and even Z technology deployed under the project, showing the advancements and improvements that have been made over the course of it. So I think it's been clear from some of the previous discussions that fuel cell micro-CHP technology is sometimes a little overlooked or underappreciated. And through the PACE trial activities, we've really worked to help promote the uptake of the technology across Europe. And a wealth of different resources have been created to achieve this. Something that's been really important is being able to understand the current regulatory barriers that stand in the way of wider market uptake. A working group was established to debate these different issues and to understand the different barriers that are out there currently. And these were split into 5 key pillars, including financial incentives, electricity tariffs, grid connection, and other such pillars that encompass the key barriers. I think what's been seen under all of these pillars is a lack of standardization across Europe and sometimes a lack of consistency, which causes the kind of most significant barrier to the uptake of the technology. For most barriers, there are examples of best case practices in specific countries, but in most cases, these are not reflected across multiple countries in the EU. They exist as a best case example in one country, but are not widespread. So this in itself is a big issue. It shows that a best case scenario can be seen, but more cooperation and consistency across member states is needed to achieve that. In a similar vein, a second working group was established to exchange on the current training landscape and to understand different approaches to training for installers. Under the PACE project, old CALUX training materials were updated and translated into English as an outreach tool. And extensive stakeholder consultation was also carried out to really understand the existing landscape of training as it is currently. So there is not currently any formal certification for fuel cell micro-CHP installers across Europe, and there's no standardized training either. The majority of the PACE OEMs conduct their own training for installers and for salespeople, as this doesn't exist in a more standardized form. Interestingly, from our stakeholder consultation, this is not considered to be one of the biggest barriers by the manufacturers themselves. Many feel that given the lack of standardization in other areas, a more standardized training wouldn't necessarily be particularly useful at this point. Many reported that they would feel they would still need to have their additional own training to add on to this, given the inconsistencies in regulation and requirements in policy across different countries. Having said this, it is still something important to consider in the future, and alongside more significant improvements and changes, this could be beneficial. There's also been a lot of key lessons learned from the trial itself and through the market experience that has been gained, which has been compiled into a public report which will be available on the PACE website. PACE has really offered the manufacturers within it the opportunity to share best case practices through deployment and manufacturing and work in a cooperative environment that enables improvement in all areas. It's really a testament to what can be achieved when these manufacturers, when businesses can come together and work on this. And I think that the importance of that cooperation and communication between stakeholders for novel technologies such as this really cannot be overstated. And this ties in with the issues with the regulatory barriers that we have as well, where more communication and more cooperation would allow for the bettering of these and for these to be overcome. Finally, there have been a lot of learnings with regards to servicing and after-sales support as well. As with any sort of novel technology, it can be a bit of a risk for customers to purchase and to commit to without guarantees. So it's been seen through the PACE project the importance of focusing on a really sophisticated aftercare support for the customers and a strong servicing package, which is included in the PACE project. So despite these different barriers and problems that are still out there, the PACE project has really allowed for this technology to be tested at scale, at an unprecedented scale across Europe. And not only that, but it has also proved that the technology is performing well and it is ready for wider market uptake. You'll hear in more detail about the performance of the units from Peter, I'm sure, but we have some of the key statistics on this slide. And I think we can see that the performance so far is really positive. As I mentioned before, there have been a number of barriers or obstacles, and the fact that PACE has managed to overcome these from COVID-19 to rising anti-gas regulation, the energy insecurity across Europe, it's really no small feat that PACE has still gone on to achieve these objectives and to allow for the technology to be tested at scale and demonstrate the capabilities of it for the wider sector. The manufacturers themselves have been able to gain valuable experience across Europe that can be taken away from this project. I think in addition to understanding that it's performing well and the objectives have been achieved, we've also received really positive feedback from the customers themselves, as can be seen with up to 90% customer satisfaction so far. So this is something that we've worked to understand throughout the trial. We're collecting data on customer attitudes and feedback through a set of 3 different surveys. The first is sent out to customers before they even have their unit installed to understand their motivations and their expectations for the technology. And then there are 2 follow-up surveys to this after 1 year of operation with their unit and then after a second year as well. So these surveys are, the aims of them is to really understand not just the general profile of a PACE customer, of someone who is interested in this technology and wants to invest in it, but also understanding how their expectations are being met, if they're being met, how satisfied they are with the performance of their technology, and also ultimately their understanding, their willingness to pay for equivalent such technologies in the future as well. There's been a really high level of engagement with these surveys. We've had over 1,700 responses of the 2,500 units commissioned. And so from this, we've been able to gain a really in-depth understanding of the feedback and of customer attitudes to the technology. And this has been collated into 3 different reports across the course of the project. They're public reports, so can be found on the website. The last one, in fact, is due to be published this week. So from these surveys and from the data that we've collected, we're able to understand the general profile of someone who's investing in this technology. We know that most respondents displayed really positive attitudes towards green climate change agendas and as well as towards new technologies, and new products, new brands. A general PACE customer is what could be referred to as an early adopter, someone who's keen to help advance new technology and is also perhaps slightly less averse to some of the financial and the operational risks that can come with investing in a new technology. On the bottom right there, you can see the top motivations for purchasing one of the units. So we know that the energy savings, cost savings, and CO2 reduction were the 3 highest motivating factors for customers in the PACE project. And based on the statements on the left, which were most selected by customers that they felt that they relate to, we can see that these are generally people who consider themselves caring about their environmental impact, wanting to actively participate in reducing their own emissions, and also willing to pay more for technologies such as fuel cell micro-CHPs that will allow them to do this, will allow them to help decarbonize their buildings and reduce their own carbon emissions. As well as understanding who a PACE customer is and what makes up the general profile, we also know that ultimately they're very happy with the performance of the technology. So we know that just under 80% of all respondents reported their overall satisfaction or their overall experience with the unit as being either very positive or positive, and less than 10% reported it as being a negative experience. In particular, we have on the slide here 4 different parameters with regards to various technical operating factors of the units, which again has very high responses of people considering these positive or very positive. Even more if you consider the neutral responses, and across all areas there's very low rates of reporting them as negative or very negative. Something else that customers were asked about was what areas of the technology might still need improvements. And what's interesting from those responses is that we can see that in all areas of technical operation, all technical parameters, such as the ones on the slide and other areas of it, these were consistently found to be already sufficient by customers. In fact, the most commonly selected area in need of improvement was with regards to the public visibility of the technology. So from this, it's clear that from the perspective of end users, the technology itself is performing well and they are happy with it. If there's an area that they felt needed more improvement, it would be with regards to public visibility with awareness about the technology. This, I think, ties in well with the regulatory barriers that we identified as a project as well, and understanding that the technology itself is ready and is performing well, and it's just the market and the public perception that needs to catch up with that. So overall, we can see that the appraisal of the systems remains very high. And we also know that the units have effectively helped to save money for the customers as well. So the fuel cell micro-CHP units under PACE have effectively helped to protect users from volatile power prices and still managed to deliver savings despite the spikes that we've had. 70% of customers reported experiencing a reduction in their electricity bills following having their unit installed. And 34% of these actually experienced a saving of more than 100 euros a month on their electricity bills. It is important to consider, again, the external factors that have influenced this trial and the external market conditions that have affected energy prices. Obviously, the COVID-19 pandemic, the war in Ukraine, and the ongoing energy crisis has done unforeseen things to the energy market that could not have been predicted before this. This has meant that in a lot of cases, the financial benefits of the units were perhaps slightly lower than expected by some of the customers. But I think that this is to be expected in this kind of situation. And despite these external obstacles, these barriers, savings have still been delivered. As I said, 70% experienced a decrease in electricity bills, and 16% did still experience savings and decreases in their gas and oil bills as well. So I think it's not to be ignored that these were slightly lower than expectations, but given the market conditions and the external factors affecting it, we can see that savings were still able to be delivered, and the fuel cell micro-CHP units were delivering significant financial benefits to the customers in the project. So I think a key takeaway that we have from the PACE trial itself is that it's really allowed for the technology to be tested at scale in a real-world scenario where we've been able to obtain detailed data on its performance. We know that the customers like it. We know that the technology works, that it's ready for wider market uptake. And although there are still some key barriers preventing this, on the whole, it's performing well throughout the trial. I will hand over to Peter from DTU now. Any of the reports I mentioned are available on the PACE website, so feel free to read more about them. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see if I can get my slides up here. Let's go. Okay. I just changed it. There we go. Yes. So my name is Peter. I am from the Technical University of Denmark, from the Department of Energy Conversion and Storage. And I will have to see if I can test my eyesight and see what I actually wrote on my slide on this small screen down here. So normally on a daily-to-daily basis, I am doing research in the very, very small parts of these units. So I'm looking at the nano and the microstructure of the electrodes. So for me, it's really, really cool to see the kind of the big perspective of things here from a European perspective rather than the bottom up where I'm normally looking at things. So today I will talk about two things, two data analysis tasks we have been doing at DTU. The first is results on a user survey done by the users. So this is data that is collected and reported by the users themselves. And the other report is performance validation of data from all the installed units, and this data is provided from the manufacturers. So first off, let me talk about the user survey. There we go. Right. So this data is collected through a survey that's sent to the participating end users. So here we are trying to strike a balance between the the complexity of the task for the end user and the amount of the good data we get in the end. So of course, the more complex questions we ask the end users, the fewer respondents we are kind of expecting to get out of the end. So this has really been a large discussion on this field on how much information we can expect the end user to supply, balanced up against how much data we need to actually be able to answer some of these questions. So we've done a lot to try to make this as easy as possible for the end user by making very clear instructions. We've also produced some videos about how to fill in this questionnaire. But we still see that it is quite a challenge for the end user to fill in this fairly complex and technical questionnaire that it is to report this technical side of the operation of their unit in the end. So all the end users here, they are anonymous. That means that we at DTU, we do not have access to their identity. This also means that it's a little bit of a challenge in the data analysis because we cannot go back to ask the users, what did you actually mean when you reported, for instance, this value in the questionnaire? So all this means that we have, see if I can read the numbers. So 237 surveys were started by the users. But due to the challenge of actually reporting all the technical details, we saw that many of the users actually got stuck throughout the questionnaire and never completed it. So out of these 237 that engaged with the questionnaire, we only saw that 95 of those actually filled in the entire questionnaire with all the data that we asked for them. And then of course, due to human errors and the kind of the technical aspect of this questionnaire that we are asking them to fill in, it means that sometimes there are errors in the survey that the users fill in, and that means that we needed to also cut away some of the data that simply didn't make sense, right? Sometimes there was like orders of magnitude differences in kind of the expected magnitude of the reported data. And of course, we had to filter those out to get some data in the end that was sensible to analyze. So in the end, we ended up with 39 cases where we had what I would say valid data, and this is what I will go more into depth about here. So before I show you the actual data, I would just like to talk about some of both the nice things about the data, but also some of the drawbacks of the data. So there are some clear limitations in getting data from a questionnaire, as you might imagine. And it's not just saying that, oh, this was great, this was not great. It's a matter of they need to figure out, for example, they need to find the electricity bills from a year back. And then they need to find the electricity bill from the current period we are comparing that to. And then they need to put those numbers into the system. So it's quite a complex questionnaire to fill in. And this, of course, means that there are a lot of human errors in this questionnaire, in the data we have received. And there's a lot of assumptions that will need to be made and a lot of potential biases in this data. So it means that we need to take this data with a grain of salt, but this is kind of what we are going into with the data I will show you here. I think also there's a nice point in this, is that this is at the same time, it's not the best data I have ever worked with because it's from a questionnaire, but at the same time, this is really nice data because it comes directly from the end users, right? So this is the data that the end user is directly reporting to us. It's not something that we have made a theoretical calculation about. This is something that's directly gotten from the end user of the fuel cell micro-CHP unit. So here I would just like to go through a few examples, just to paint a picture of the type of kind of data we have received from the end users, and also talk a little about some of the assumptions we need to make and some of the limitations in the data analysis that we are doing here. So the first example here, so now I will need to move a little bit closer just to be able to, or maybe I'll even turn around to be able to read my slides here. You can see this is from an end user that has switched from a previous technology of heating oil to this fuel cell micro-CHP unit. And we can see from this end user saw a savings reduction where they saved 800 euros annually, corresponding to 25%. They also reduced the grid-board electricity by 13% and overall reduced CO2 emissions by 20%. And then I come down here to, at the bottom here, some of these kind of data limitations that you see here, right? So if you inspect the sheet over here, you will see that they actually still use a lot of electricity from the grid, right? But we also know at the same time that this fuel cell micro-CHP unit has actually produced much more than they have, taken from the grid. So to us, this kind of means that they are actually feeding a lot of electricity back into the grid, but still buying something back from the grid at the same time. But of course, we don't know fully this because this is something that is not very clear from the questionnaire because we had to reduce the complexity of it. But this is something we can speculate what is going on behind these numbers. But still, the numbers are valid for what the user experienced here. Going on to the next example from property 2 here, we can see that this user changed from a previous technology of natural gas. Here the user saved annually 374 euros, corresponding to 14%. They reduced the grid-board electricity by 107%. And you might think, okay, it's above 100%. That doesn't make sense, does it? And this is actually because the user reported a negative electricity use after the introduction of the fuel cell micro-CHP unit. So to us, that means that the user is actually producing more energy than it's consuming. So it's actually selling electricity back to the grid, but still using electricity from the grid at other times. So these were 2 examples from individual property cases. So these are, here we have divided the same numbers up on what technology was replaced before the fuel cell micro-CHP unit was introduced. And we can see that if an oil burner was replaced, then we saw an average CO2 reduction of 36%, savings of 27%, and savings in primary energy use of 12%. If a gas burner was reduced, we saw a CO2 reduction of 2%, cost savings of 7%, and primary energy savings of 9%. So it's really clear here that replacing an oil burner with a fuel cell micro-CHP unit is particularly favorable. Yes, so on to the overall savings. So for all the units reported in this survey here, we saw in general a CO2 reduction of 16%, cost savings of 12% and primary energy savings of 9%. But here I would still like to stress the very, very uncertain data foundation we have here, right? This is really there's a lot of big biases in this, so I will not put so much emphasis on the magnitude of these numbers, but basically focus on the message here that every user that... sorry, sorry about that, hope you can hear me still. That every user that actually participated in this survey, they saw savings across the board. They saw savings in the cost, they saw savings in CO2, and they saw savings in the primary energy use by using this fuel cell micro-CHP unit. And then the magnitude is up for discussion based on this data. So now I will go on to the second part. This is the performance validation of the installed units. So this is a little bit of a shorter story because it's also much clearer. So now I will move over here again. Yes. So as you can see over here, this is the map of installed units. And this is by April 2022. So we are currently doing the final data analysis of all the data because we want to include as much data in the final analysis as possible. So that's why it's not ready quite yet. It will be ready in all the public reports on the PACE website in a few weeks, a month. But we can still report on the data up until April 2022. So what we're receiving here from the manufacturers is data on how much gas each unit is producing, how much electricity that unit has been producing, how many hours it has been operating, and also data on any failures that might have been encountered during that operation time. So here, all of a sudden, I'm much more positive. This is the type of data I like to work with. So here we really have a lot of data. And I think this is really a great outcome of this project here. So we actually have data from over 30 million hours of operation of these units. So this is really significant. And if you look at the graph here over on the right, you can see that the project started up slowly, but has really been ramping up in the number of hours operated and also in the electricity produced. So kind of as a comparison, you could actually cook 35 million pots of pasta using this energy that has been produced in this project alone, right? That's significant, that's a lot. And also this provides a great data foundation for doing this validation of this of these technologies, right? So we have a lot of data to work with, and also we have so much data that we can actually say something about the reliability of the technology here. So this is also my final slide here. So the conclusions here, validations are quite clear. So we have validated the performance based on this really great data foundation, and we found that the gas utilization we can calculate from the data, it actually corresponds very, very well with the values that are reported from the manufacturers. So we can say, yes, they are working as intended, these units, which is really great. And also based on the availability, we can see that these units have an availability of about 95 to 95%. And just as an anecdote, so I've been working in this field looking at the very, very small stuff since 2007. And for me, this is really cool to be part of a project where we can now see some of these things I've been working with for so long come to fruition, right? You can see them deployed in the field, and you can see that these units they are really working, and they are reliable at the same time. So I think with that, I will just end with my contact information. So if you have any questions, you can ask me or contact me later. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Isobel, and thank you, Peter. We move to the next presentation, which is for work package 4, the economic analysis. Unfortunately, Christoph fell ill before traveling to Brussels, so couldn't come here in person. And due to his illness, a member of his team has stepped in and has done a pre-recording of his presentation. So both Andre Egli, who's a research associate, part of Christoph's team, is the one who giving the presentation, but he and his colleague Oliver will both be available at the end of this session for any question and answers. So they're not here in person, but they are following already online now. And if you have any particular questions regarding the report on the economic analysis, please feel free to ask your question in the audience or put your question in the Q&A function. So if we can go ahead and play the recording.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure for me to present on behalf of HSLU the results from our work package 4, the value of flexibility from micro-CHP systems. First, let's ask ourselves, why do we even need flexibility? Many countries in Europe are planning to phase out nuclear or coal and instead replace them with solar and wind. At the same time, the demand side is also being electrified, for example, by means of electric transportation or heat pumps. This obviously creates some challenges in the grid, and there are multiple solutions how to fix it. The International Energy Agency predicts that demand response will be a key driver, and especially the building sectors will play a key role until 2030, as shown here in the green bar. In 2019, there was a survey in Germany with 800 plus TSOs, where they were asked how do they cope with this challenge. And most of them use bigger lines, more copper, undergrounding of lines, and installing a bigger transformer. Only 6% of the DSO, so a far minority, will use peak shaving as a network optimization measure. We have thus looked at the value of demand flexibility from a literature review. The work on micro-CHP systems is quite limited, so we resorted to flexibility from other sources as well. The results show that there is a value of around 300, 400, 500 euros per kilowatt of flexibility per year that can be valued when using flexibility. The results also depend on the country of study or the source of the flexibility, the year, etc. But the bulk figure is in that area. Of course, there is multiple applications where flexibility from demand response can be useful. The DSO is one example, because obviously you need to somehow share the energy at your neighborhood level or at district level. On the other side, we also have the TSO, the higher voltage lines that need our attention, and work package 4 especially focused on secondary or tertiary control reserves. So the transmission system operator is charged on a national level to purchase flexibility to guarantee the grid safety. So even if a power plant has an unexpected outage, there needs to be reserve capacity online that can take over and mitigate the stresses. Micro-CHP system can, of course, also play a role in that. They can be aggregated such that the kilowatt of each system becomes part of a bigger pool, which then can be offered via an aggregator to the transmission system operator to stabilize the grid. In order to quantify the revenue streams associated to flexibility at TSO level, we used the HSLU Distributed Energy Management Suite, this suite toolbox. It is a model-based optimization framework, which has a model of single-family houses, multi-family houses in various countries, and we can play around with the energy system that the house is relying on. So it can represent heat pumps, micro-CHP system, electric boilers, gas boilers, and of course also the inhabitants that use light and also emit body heat, for example. As input, we use energy prices in the corresponding country, historic meteo data, and subsidies that play a role in the financial side. As output, there will be the operation policy, so which hours should, for example, the heat pump be activated, and how much would it cost doing so. Also, we can work out the CO2 emissions. First, we simulated self-consumption policy. We see that households pay a lot for electricity and also for gas. And when they install a fuel cell, they use slightly more gas, but they can generate their own electricity, which is, on a financial perspective, very valuable. So we have looked here at a single family house that can either be located in Germany, Belgium, or Czech Republic. And in green, you would have the energy costs without the micro-CHP, so the gas for the gas boiler from the grid and the electricity for the residual loads, lighting, cooking, baking, etc., also from the grid. This gives you around 2,000 euros per year in energy costs, assuming pre-pandemic energy prices. In Belgium, the situation is comparably. Now, if we introduce a fuel cell, the energy costs will drop quite a bit because, yeah, you don't have to, you produce your own electricity at lower costs than what it consumes in terms of chemical energy from the gas. Also, there will be some income related to feed in of excess electricity. In the Czech Republic, the situation is a bit different with regards that electricity is cheaper, gas is a bit expensive, and there is less favorable subsidies for micro-CHP systems. Now, the self-consumption is obviously the primary business case, but we can, on top of that, value stack additional savings from those balancing markets, automatic or manual frequency restoration. I've here displayed the savings in percent, so additional with regards to self-consumption. If it was at 100%, you wouldn't have to pay for gas and electricity because the balancing income would pay for that. We can see in Germany and Belgium, the revenues are relatively low. But in the Czech Republic, where we see self-consumption not being that profitable, the balancing market can pose a noteworthy income. Other than looking at flexibility for the transmission system operator, we used here in the final study flexibility to reduce the carbon footprint. So we used a single family house in this simulation. We placed it in Germany and looked at the hourly emission intensity of the electricity grid. So especially in winter, when there is an import of energy from the neighbors states, lots of coal, lots of gas. It is typically quite cold, so a lot of heating demand, and a heat pump as a standalone heating system is performing quite bad because, yeah, the electricity is quite high CO2 intensive, and also there is a lot of heat demand. While the coefficient of performance, we have also that in hourly resolution, drops considerably. On the left-hand side, we have compared 3 different combinations of heating system and calculated the annual emissions and the annual energy costs. On the top right corner, you have a gas boiler scenario. So it would use gas to generate the heat, the electricity from the grid. And the emission would be around 5 tons per year for the whole house of like 5 people, 100 square meter living area. The cost would be around 2,500 euros, depending, of course, on the exact year of study. When we compare that to the fuel cell plus gas boiler scenario, you would see that there is already quite substantial drop in both costs and annual emissions, because the fuel cell would be operated in those hours where the CO2 intensity is highest, and you're producing your own electricity in highly efficient solid oxide fuel cell would be better than purchasing the electricity from the grid. Also, there is, as we saw before from the self-consumption, there is a substantial saving as well, and even an income from excess electricity back to the grid. The best performing option is, however, to combine a fuel cell and a heat pump. So then you can use the heat pump when electricity is clean, or you can use the fuel cell when the emission intensity is high, or you can even run both of them together in those hours where it makes sense, for example, when it's very cold. On the right-hand side, we have shown the solid oxide fuel cell plus heat pump combination in a different format. We have here the winter months of 2022, December, January, February, and we have a Sankey diagram that shows the average energy flow of those months. On the top right, we have the fuel cell, which is fed by natural gas or hydrogen and would generate about 60% of electricity, and 40% of the fuel cell output is heat. Heat is separated between hot water, so at 60-degree flow temperature in red, and we also have room heating in orange, yellow, that is lower temperature levels. We have used here a radiator heating house, so the flow temperature would be, depending on the outside temperature, between 35 and 55 degrees in very cold days. The electricity of the fuel cell can either be used in the home directly, it can either be exported to the grid, or it can be used at the heat pump. The heat pump takes heat from the environment and transforms it to a higher temperature level, so to those 55 or even higher for hot water. One of the key benefits of this combination is that the solid oxide fuel cell runs at quite high temperature, so you can use the fuel cell to generate most of the hot water, such that the heat pump can concentrate on those low temperature room heating flow levels, which means the temperature difference for the heat pump is lower and it operates at a more efficient coefficient of performance. One thing worth highlighting might be that in this combination, the electricity that is imported from the grid is lower than what is exported back to the grid at those times when electricity is dirtiest. So the fuel cell can contribute actively to the emissions of the overall energy system. To summarize, the combination of fuel cell and heat pumps is very attractive, both in terms of CO2 emissions and energy costs. The greatest opportunity, at least financially, from micro-CHP comes today from maximizing self-consumption, but there is an additional side business case in countries where self-consumption policies are less favorable. For example, the Czech Republic, where electricity is a bit cheaper while gas is more expensive. So this spark spread is less favorable for self-consumption alone. In these cases, you could make some additional income on the balancing markets. The literature shows that congestion management and peak saving could also attribute attractive offering for micro-CHP if the DSOs were ready to use these measures. With that, I conclude my presentation and I'm happy to answer your question in the Q&A session. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Andre. Like I said, if you have any questions, put it in the Q&A function if you're online, and be ready for the Q&A session at the end. We have one more presentation before we can get to the Q&A session, so I'm happy to invite Nicolas Thorel, a senior consultant from Element Energy, and he will present the business case and future scenarios, which is part of the work package 3. So, Nicolas.
Thank you, Hans. Thanks everyone for coming and everyone watching online. I'm going to...
It takes a sec.
I'm going to present a work package 3.2 that we completed, looking at the consumer business case and future scenarios of micro-CHP at a relatively high level, and I'll be covering the main methodology and assumptions that we went through, a quick overview of the results focusing on a single country, and then a look at what the conclusions might mean for the future market of micro-CHPs under different scenarios. So, looking at the background introduction, so really the key aim is to determine the consumer business case for micro-CHP. We've done that with two main metrics. The first is our discounted lifetime costs. So that's adding your capital costs and your operational costs, such as fuel, adding them all together over the lifetime of the system and looking at the other end, what that means for the consumer, again, over the end of an entire lifetime. We also looked at lifetime carbon emissions. As indicated by Isobel, a lot of the early adopters are interested in the emission savings, so we looked at the lifetime emissions for systems installed currently. A methodology, we used a simulation of each system using an hourly operation model. We assumed projections of fuel prices as well as emissions decarbonization of the electricity grid. These assumptions went through several rounds of review between last summer and a couple of months ago. As you can appreciate, it's been quite a difficult period to estimate prices. So based on these annual average emissions factors and prices, we also test the sensitivity of micro-CHPs to different factors, and we look at what the future can look like and how it can compete to different technologies. So again, a quick overview of one of the key points that we looked at is the summary of price projections, which are shown on this graph here. These are our best guesses as of a few months ago, but by no means are they exhaustive, or will they not change in the future. We see the big spike, that's the energy crisis of the last year and this one, after which we anticipated a resumption of sort of business as usual over the next few years. The key point from this slide is also that we'll be considering a future scenario where we looked at a variety of hydrogen prices for different countries. Something to note is that those hydrogen prices are, estimated to be higher than the current natural gas prices. Again, these are estimates, so we've included the sensitivities of the micro-CHP to changes to these predictions. So looking at the scope of the study, fuel cell micro-CHP is one of many options, so we considered several different types of micro-CHP systems, and we compared them to the main sort of current counterfactuals that we identified. That's a gas boiler and an air source heat pump. In terms of consumers, we categorized them by three different house types. That's single-family homes, terraced houses, and multi-family homes. And we further separated those two down by the age of the property. So pre-1980 homes that were built before 1980, and then post-1980 homes, that's sort of newer houses. We looked in detail into the 4 different countries whose flags are shown there on your bottom left. That's Belgium, Germany, Italy, and the UK. So we've produced results for each of these countries. For ease of time, at the end of the day, we went through 192 scenarios. For ease of time, I'll mostly be going through Belgian results, but we'll be drawing conclusions from all different countries. Finally, we looked at 2 main scenarios. That's a 2023 installation. So what happens if you install a micro-CHP today? What needs to happen in order for it to be, economically and environmentally viable? And we also looked at 2040, and the main change there is that hydrogen is used as an input fuel instead of your natural gas or potentially biomethane. Diving straight into the results for the 2023 installations initially. So the main message that we found from our modeled outputs, which again may not reflect the real world use of these technologies, but from our modeled outputs, we saw that micro-CHPs were the best technology on a cost perspective, especially for large consumers. So that's multi-family homes, in certain other countries, bigger single-family homes, which may extend also to businesses with a big annual heat demand. On emissions results, so that's the lifetime emissions of micro-CHP systems over the next 15 years, we saw that it was difficult for them to compete with other technologies. This is primarily due to the decarbonization of the electricity grid, but again, there are a few optimizations that can alter these results one way or the other. The important thing to mention is that we're using annual average emission factors. If hourly emission factors can be used, they can reduce the emissions of micro-CHPs, but also reduce their load factor, hence reducing potentially their economic case. So looking at the results for 23 installations, we see a breakdown there on the left of how micro-CHPs perform, and as mentioned by Peter earlier, there's a vast reduction in electricity use compared both to gas boilers, but also especially to air source heat pumps. So this reduction in electricity, in electricity purchased because of the self-generation and self-consumption, kind of makes up for some of the added capital costs, and eventually you end up here on the bottom right graph with a payback period against air source heat pumps within this pre-1980 multifamily home of 2 years against air source heat pumps, and following a fuel cell stack replacement of about 10 years with gas boilers. So looking at the emissions side of things, so the electricity decarbonization of power systems throughout Europe, especially Western Europe, over the next 15, 20 years, reduces the value of electricity generated from natural gas domestically. Now, this is initially not great news for the immediate future of micro-CHPs based on natural gas. However, there are many levers to pull to turn that situation around. The grid decarbonization can occur slower than our projections for various reasons, or also there could be a potential in other countries, in other parts of the world, or also in the EU that decarbonize slower than the ones that we've seen here in this study, slower than the UK, Belgium, Germany, Italy. We can also use hourly emissions factors, as was tested by our colleagues at HSLU. Using this is kind of a twofold attempt. Ultimately, you can only run the micro-CHP when it is environmentally sound to do so. So logically, you will never end up with a higher lifetime emissions than counterfactuals. However, it might lower your technology load factor. So eventually, if you're limited to those times where the grid produces electricity that has a higher carbon intensity, then you might limit the time that the micro-CHP is able to produce that electricity, that valuable electricity, and produce that economic benefit. Finally, and this is the thing that we'll be diving into a little bit deeper, is considering the biomethane use, so that considering that a portion of your methane that you buy, instead of being from natural gas, comes from biomethane, and looking at how much of that would be needed to reach environmental parity with air source heat pumps, and looking at the potential cost implications of that. So this is due to increase the gas price, because at the moment and in the future, biomethane is predicted to be more economically valuable than natural gas. So bear with me for these graphs. Essentially, this is a matrix of lifetime emissions for micro-CHPs compared to air source heat pumps. So the sections in red there on the top left are areas where we use sort of unabated natural gas, just straight up fossil fuel, as an input source. And the lower we go, the more biomethane we use as our source fuel. There is a break-even spot, and this is different for each country, each consumer type that we've tested for. Here we're looking at pre-1980 multifamily homes, and using our projections and our annual emissions factors, we see that about 60% of the incoming methane should be supplied from biomethane in order to reach that environmental parity with air source heat pumps. Now that might change if you include marginal emissions factor instead, which is moving to the right of that grid, looking at a sort of a higher carbon intensity factor for electricity. So what that means economically. So I mentioned before that adding biomethane to a consumer fuel supply is likely to increase that consumer price. But we see here that even an increase of 4 or 5 cents per kilowatt hour maintains the micro-CHP's economic parity with air source heat pump. So in a lot of these consumers, there is room for the fuel price to grow. So potentially room for consumers to pay a premium for biomethane to reduce their emissions, but still maintain economic parity with air source heat pump. As a conclusion of 23 installations, Micro-CHPs really offer the best benefits to larger users. That's your largest users, especially those, if you can find, that consume energy and heat non-seasonally. That way you can make the most of the asset that you've bought. However, over the long term, we indicate that fuel cell micro-CHPs may need biomethane, as was described in previous panel sessions, to really further reduce those emissions for our drive to net zero. There are a few values here. All the way on the right of that table is that ability for gas prices to increase, for your blended gas price to increase, and still maintain economic and environmental parity with air source heat pumps. This is conducted for pre-1980 multifamily homes in each country. So Belgium shows initially the most favorable conditions, but Germany, Italy, and the UK are between 20 and between 19 and 36% of a price uplift to buy that biomethane. Now we switch pace and we look at the 2040 scenario. So we conducted a similar business case looking at the future of a 2040 scenario. The key change here being, as I mentioned before, that hydrogen is now your input fuel. So this has a couple of impacts, and there are a couple of impacts that I've highlighted here. So initially, the capital costs of equipment and installation are due to come down slightly for both air source heat pumps and fuel cell micro-CHPs. Hydrogen boiler capital costs are due to stay around about the same. When you look at the fuel costs, the hydrogen, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, is likely to be quite a bit higher than the natural gas costs that we're used to at the moment, or at least that we were used to a couple of years ago. So the fuel costs for micro-CHPs and hydrogen boiler will be higher. The emissions of all input fuels are lower, so low in fact that we did not do an emissions analysis. We assumed that green hydrogen is used for the hydrogen-based system, and that by 2040 the electricity is decarbonized enough that that comparison is no longer necessary compared to today. The system efficiencies improve across the board with mixed results for hydrogen boilers, where efficiencies might decrease due to a higher flame temperature. We'll go too much into that detail. Then there are widespread benefits, as indicated by HSLU, for demand-side response of fuel cell micro-CHPs of the order of 518 euros per kilowatt paid annually, which we've included into this study. And we also looked at the benefit of demand flexibility and time of use tariffs for those electricity-based heat demands. So the key message being that fuel cell micro-CHP and air source heat pumps are both sort of the winners of the 2040 scenario in the way that we've modeled. So here we have the economic results for those 2040 installations. And again, air source heat pumps remains the best option for across the houses. However, micro-CHP, among houses that for some reason cannot accept air source heat pumps, we heard about the monumental houses earlier. For those that rely on hydrogen-based systems, we found that in the vast majority of cases, micro-CHPs were the best hydrogen-based option. Even in those smaller terraced houses, for certain countries, that remained the case, which I think offers quite positive results. We conducted the same analysis that I won't go into detail too much, but essentially rising or lowering, going up or down in the graph rises or lowers the hydrogen price, and looks at that sensitivity and shows that again, there's a bit of leeway for fuel prices so that micro-CHPs maintain economic parity. This time it's with hydrogen boilers, so with their hydrogen counterfactual. So moving on to the overall conclusion of our work, we see that 2023 installations, fuel cell micro-CHPs requires careful consideration of the types of consumers and the types of operation that they're built in. The installations in high energy consumers are particularly relevant, especially on the economic front. The emissions, however, needs a bit more thinking and can be mitigated by three factors, considering different electricity decarbonization projections or countries, optimizing the system operation, but keeping in mind that that might lower the technology load factor and hence the economic case, and also replacing a certain proportion, or 100%, of fossil gas with biomethane. In 2040 installations, air source heat pumps were the lowest cost option in all cases. However, in houses where hydrogen is available that cannot take these heat pump-based options, fuel cell micro-CHPs perform strongly against hydrogen boilers. In 20 of the 24 cases we found, they perform better on a discounted lifetime cost basis. And I think that's the conclusion of my presentation. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Nicolas. We have about 10 minutes for question and answers. So I'll first look to the people in front of me in the building. Are there any questions from your side? That'll give me time to look at the Q&A function in Zoom. Oh, wow.
Hello.
Oh, Hans.
Hans van der Zeepen for Nicolas. Do you understand me? Is it on? Yeah, okay. You compare air source heat pumps with micro-CHP. Now I see the CHP is going to displace central generated electricity, while heat pumps are going to add electricity demand, which has to be fulfilled with new electricity generation. Now in the Belgian case, how did you calculate the fact that they are adding new gas plants in order to have security of supply during winter? Do you see an average emission factor, or do you use marginal emission factor?
Yeah, good question. It's something that we've been talking about, especially with HSLU, so they might want to come in. We've used average emissions factors because of the scale of electricity that will come online. However, it's worth noting that the reduction in primary energy required by air source heat pumps means that even if you produce electricity from gas boilers or from central gas-fired CCGTs and then fire that through the grid, your emissions per unit of heat are still lower. Of course, your emissions of electricity will be around that of gas. Your emission per unit of heat will be lower than that produced by micro-CHPs. So I suppose that was the logic. Of course, marginal emissions factors are higher, which is sort of why we looked at the sensitivity studies and allow the public to change the emissions factor, the heat demand emissions factor that they expect in different countries. And different countries have different ranges. For example, Germany has a wider spread of emissions factors than the UK. And we allow the viewers and the readers of our report to themselves see the impact of marginal emissions factors on the lifetime emissions of each system. So just to answer that question on the matrices that I was showing you, you'll just go right, so go towards an emissions factor that is more intensive than the average one that we considered, and then you look at the amount of biomethane required there, if there is any, to reach parity on a lifetime basis. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Nicolas. Any other questions from the audience? Gunnar?
Yeah, Hans, you stole my question, because that was exactly what I wanted to ask as well, as it's known that differential analysis gives a better resolution, gives better result than an average calculation. So therefore, I have another one for Isobel, and a simple one. I noticed that in the overview on the European map, only 6 units were built in Netherlands. As the Netherlands are quite natural gas-rich country, and they use it quite often. How do you explain that this only fair number was installed in the Netherlands? And the second one, if you can hear me, to André, about the flexibility you assessed in your analysis of the literature, that it's about 300 to 400 kilowatt euro per kilowatt and year. I wonder how this can serve as a benchmark if grid expansion does only cost 100 to 150 euros per kilowatt and year.
Okay, maybe we start with you.
Yeah. So I think in terms of the spread across the countries, it's, as you say, the Netherlands has a high natural gas percentage, but it's more to do with where the manufacturers are based and are aiming their sales and marketing campaigns. A lot of our manufacturers within the PACE project are largely based, have hubs in Germany and in Belgium. There's also strong subsidy schemes in these countries that support the uptake as well. So I think within this specific project, they became the more focused countries for the installations, and that's why we tended to have fewer in the Netherlands. But I think it's definitely still a country that has a strong market potential. I think it was one that was included in the analysis of market potential that was done by COGEN Europe as well, to see the future of that. But in the case of this specific project, wasn't necessarily the focus for the OEMs, I think.
I can maybe add on that regarding the Netherlands. It's also a political situation. You mentioned that the Netherlands is very gas rich, and that a lot of that gas is found in the north of the country, in Groningen. That's no longer being tapped and utilized, and there's been a government decision to sort of move away from gas, natural gas in particular, especially mandating that new homes built after, I can't remember the exact date, would not be connected to the gas grid. So there was a strong push away from natural gas towards electrification, but as we've seen in the last 12 to 18 months, there's been a bit of a U-turn, and so they are reconsidering and looking for the right balance between electrification and the use of molecules. So actually we have Oliver Wool online. Maybe Oliver, you can answer the second part of Gunnar's question.
I'm not sure that I can answer this question. Yeah, Andre is not here at the moment, I'm sorry, and I was not part of the project in this time when they looked at the savings from flexibility markets. So maybe we can put it into the Q&A and Andre can answer it afterwards.
Yeah, thank you, Oliver.
Okay, thank you.
So we have a few more minutes left, and I'll actually take a question from the US. And this is a tricky question to answer. Has there been efforts to collaborate with utilities, understanding they implore customers to use less of their product while embracing renewables, DERs, seemingly a win-win situation? Utilities craft new business models spanning energy efficiency, demand-side management, etc., like empowering electric vehicle charging infrastructure without additional strain. Said installation numbers would increase when pairing in front and behind the meter solutions, would they not? From the United States. So actually when we began the project, we did have a utility partner from northern Germany, but I think after a year or 18 months, their own strategy changed, and they had decided to withdraw from the market, and hence why we actually went ahead and formed a collaboration and had HLSU join the project to model a lot of the work that we would have actually been able to do through real life demonstration with this said utility. In particular, they were looking at, we were planning to look at a virtual power plant, so connecting X amount of units together, working in tandem, and looking at the benefits of that. Unfortunately, that was not possible, and therefore we went for the modeling route, instead. I don't know whether the panelists have anything more to add on that. It's just the nature of a big and long project, and I'm sure, and we know that there are other examples of virtual power plant deployments at the small scale as well as at a larger scale. So there is work being done, just not in pace at this time. All right, I'm afraid that we've run out of time, and since we focus a lot on users in this panel, I'd like to end this session with a user video, and also to remind you that we have 6 user videos. We went out across Europe, interviewed different users of different technologies in different countries for different applications. And since we're in Belgium, and since you've all enjoyed the chocolate that we've left outside for you, we want to share with you the video where we interviewed the gentleman from Flanders. It is in Flemish, but there are subtitles. But I see some Dutch speakers out there, so it should be fine. If we could please play the video, and whilst we play the video, ask our panelists to step down, and before that, maybe one last applaud for the audience, panelists. And then as they get down, I ask the next set of panelists to come to the stage, please, while we play the video.
Ik ben Ivan Stuyven, zaakvoerder chocoladeatelier Stuyven. Wij zijn een bedrijf dat chocolade produceert, pralines en aanverwante dingen en twist naar het wielrennen. 12 jaar geleden was ik eigenlijk een van de pioniers voor dit projectje eigenlijk. Ik was op zoek naar een alternatief voor die zonnepanelen, omdat mijn dak totaal niet geschikt was voor zonnepanelen. En toen kwam ik toevallig in de weekendkrant als nieuwe technologie, als ik dat aan het lezen. En ik ben daar direct gesprongen, dat was voor mij overtuigend. En zo ben ik eigenlijk bij de warmtekracht gekomen. De reden waarom ik die heb aangeschaft zijn eigenlijk uit overtuiging, ecologische overtuiging. En ook een oplossing te zoeken naar een alternatief aan zonnepanelen voor mij. Dus het is onbezorgd elektriciteit produceren. Het toestel op zich is een heel gemakkelijk toestel, ik moet er niet naar omzien, maar om het alles bij te houden, zijn productie en zo, de chocolade interesseert me net iets meer dan dat, dus ik hou het zo goed niet bij. Over het laatste jaar kan ik natuurlijk heel weinig zeggen over de energiekosten, omdat het voor mij nog niet allemaal heel duidelijk is, maar de jaren daarvoor heb ik een constante en dat is voor mij zeer belangrijk om mijn prijs te bepalen van mijn eindproduct, dat ik daar geen verrassingen heb en dat is het ideaal daarvoor. De onderhoudskosten zijn ook constant, dus ook geen verrassingen daarbij. Mocht er echt een defect zijn, ik heb een onderhoudscontract, dus er zijn geen verrassingen voor mij. Het machine zelf neemt ook heel weinig plaats in beslag, dus dat was ook, ik zit met beperkte capaciteit hier qua ruimte. En dat was ook wel zeker het pluspunt dat het heel weinig, niet meer dan de wasmachine in beslag neemt. De restwarmte wordt gebruikt voor het warm water, iets wat wij ook heel veel nodig hebben. Anders zou ik daarbij nog een ketel moeten zetten en dat zijn toch wel allemaal voordelen voor mij. Voor ons is het dus heel interessant om een constante aanvoer van elektriciteit te hebben, omdat wij ook dag en nacht elektriciteit nodig hebben. En ook in de seizoenen, 's winters wat meer verwarming, in de zomer wat meer koeling. Dus voor ons is het zeer interessant een product te hebben dat constant elektriciteit kan aanleveren, dag en nacht.